everyone, I'm Georgia and this is The Sound of Georgia. So yesterday, as of this video's recording, I went to the theatre for the second time this year, so I'm just going to be talking about my thoughts on the latest show I saw, which was Juliet. For those of you who don't know anything about the show, I'll give you a second to take a guess on what it's about. Did everyone say a retelling of Romeo and Juliet? Correct. And Juliet tells the story of what if Juliet hadn't actually killed herself? What if she had the tiniest bit of common sense and decided to live even though Romeo had died? She was 13, that was never going to happen, but still. And Juliet is also a jukebox musical, which means there were no songs written for the show, but instead that the creators went to Spotify and looked at the biggest songs from the last 24 years. Picked all those for the numbers in the show. Yes, I'm being dramatic with that statement. That is how jukebox musicals work. And a retelling of Romeo and Juliet is a very interesting premise to turn into specifically a jukebox musical, in my opinion. But I will talk about that a bit more in a sec. The best way I can describe it in one sentence is fun. It's one of those musicals that doesn't necessarily need to be groundbreaking or amazing in general. I'm not specifically saying that that means the show is not good or underwhelming or lazy or anything like that, but the biggest words I can come up with are just crazy and fun. So while it is a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, it does get very meta at points. For example, William Shakespeare, as in the writer, is a character within the show. So basically, as I said, it's a retelling of Romeo and Juliet, but the plot of the show is William Shakespeare and his wife Anne Hathaway rewriting the show in real time. So Shakespeare and Anne are characters within the show, and every so often Juliet's narrative is paused to go back to them. It's a bit of a marriage drama subplot for them. It was so funny, the fact that there were so many funny lines and I can recall very few of them bums me out. But some of the ones I do remember. There is this moment where Shakespeare's rattling off a whole bunch of lines that are said to have been created by Shakespeare himself. And Anne goes, "Will you please stop quoting you?" There's a point where, like in the original Romeo and Juliet, Juliet's parents want to send her off to a nunnery, and Anne says, "We'll have none of that, it's a bad habit." Get it? Because nuns wear habits. And yes, that is part of the quote. But the funniest little quote was definitely the one towards the end, where it says, "There'll never be another Anne Hathaway," which is obviously, from a meta standpoint, hilarious, because I imagine a sizable part of the target audience grew up on Princess Diaries and believed it was quality entertainment. Yeah. If you've been around for a while, you know I'm not a fan of Princess Diaries. Another hilarious thing is the fact that Juliet's other love interest is part of a family band. I was wondering whether this would go in a Sound of Music direction, but no. Rather, it goes in a boy band direction. In fact, his family surname is Du Bois, so the big number they get up and sing as the band is Everybody by Backstreet Boys, which is just hilarious. Of course they changed the line to Du Bois back, but Mum and I were laughing our heads off at that point. So on that note, my thoughts on the songs. Now, with jukebox musicals, because you're trying to tell a story around songs that already exist, it can be kind of a bit of a hit or a miss, I think. And yes, there were a couple songs there that I thought were a bit off and a bit forced, but by and large, they worked. I would say 95% of the songs fit into the story, which I think is very impressive considering this is a tricky story to tell. I mean, a jukebox musical is one thing, but a jukebox musical that's also a retelling, I think it's very impressive that they managed to pull it off as well as they did. And despite the songs being recent-ish pop songs, I was unfamiliar with most of them. Mostly because anything written after 2017 that isn't a part of a musical is something I just completely missed because I was too busy listening to Hamilton. There's a lot of Katy Perry, a lot of Britney Spears, a lot of Backstreet Boys, and a lot of Ariana Grande. Honestly, I thought maybe we'd get a bit of Sia in there, because there's a scene where Juliet jumps on a chandelier. So I thought we might just jump into chandelier, but we don't. So I had a lot of fun singing in my head for the ones I did know, but I think the one I enjoyed the most was actually one that I had never heard before, which was Problem by Ariana Grande. So I'm definitely going to be looking that up. So I'm going to get spoilery for just a bit to talk about the ending, because I get the feeling it might be a bit controversial or divisive, but I really liked it, particularly at the end of Act 1, during the final number, which is Bon Jovi, yay, we find out that Romeo's alive too, because Shakespeare has to one-up his wife. And at the very end, Romeo and Juliet end up together again. Sorry, Juliet and Romeo. But I wasn't sure that was going to happen until, like, the second last sentence of the entire show. And I imagine a lot of people will like that. And when I say they end up together, I mean they decide to just go on a date and see how it goes. In fact, he asks her, "Do you think you can live with me forever?" And she says, "No." But I want to try. And I'm sure there are people who didn't really like that ending because they wanted her to be her own person, and strong independent women don't need no man. But that's actually why I liked it. Because by the end, Juliet is self-actualized enough to not need anybody else. She's happy with who she is as a person, and she doesn't need to be in a relationship to be happy. But she chooses to. Disney, take notes, because this is how you can give your future Disney princesses love interests and still have them be strong independent women. That was actually very much a vibe I got from the ending. So, her getting together with Romeo at the very end of the story is not because a man is all she needs, but because of the exact opposite. She wants things other than the guy, she just chooses to have the guy as well. And I really liked that. I thought the sets were really cool. They had this big screen at the top that projected certain elements of the background. There are a few instances where the characters are travelling to certain places and that screen up the top became a map. But my favourite thing they did with the screen was at the very end during the bows. As all the actors were running on stage to give their final bows, the screen at the top announced who the characters were, which I thought was really cool. And the last thing I wanted to talk about is the way that gender was approached in the story. Obviously there's a whole lot of gender things that happened with Shakespeare's work, given the fact that back then even the girl parts were played by boy actors, and, I mean, Twelfth Night's entire plot. So there definitely was a bit of a precedent for them to examine gender the way they did. For one, when Anne gives Juliet a best friend in her retelling, said best friend is very much not a girl. Not the sort of best friend Juliet would have had, but they might not necessarily be a guy either. It's very much implied that they could be non-binary. And looking at the program, a huge amount of the cast appears to be non-binary themselves. At least in our cast, the actor who played May, which is Juliet's best friend, is non-binary, as is the actor who played Romeo. Given the fact that there are so many non-binary people in the cast, or at the very least actors who use they, them as pronouns, and the fact that gender is mentioned the way it is within the story, I am very certain that this was very much an intentional choice, and I greatly applaud them for that. The one problem I had with the show isn't even a problem at all. It's the fact that the lights can be very intense at times. But that's just a personal thing. So, really, I don't have anything bad to say about the show. It has certainly not skyrocketed to the top of my favourites, and I don't know if I'd see it again, but I am very glad I went. And yes, I would recommend it. I think jukebox musicals are the shows you can recommend to people who don't even like musicals. If you like Britney and Katy Perry and the Backstreet Boys and Ariana Grande, go see the show. If you like musicals in general, go see the show. Retellings, yeah. And that's everything I've got for today. And if you've seen Anne Juliet, let me know. What are your thoughts? I think it was a very unique and ambitious project that worked 95% of the time. Feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in my video next time. So long, farewell!